Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of our distinguished speakers, moderator, professionals, academics, students, participants joining us from across Sri Lanka and overseas. I am Samantha Wickramasinghe, and I am your host. On behalf of the National Committee, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to Webinar 4 of the National Webinar Series, Climate Smart Sri Lanka, Awareness to Action, Threats, Vulnerabilities, Lessons Learned, and Future Preparedness. This webinar series is organized and hosted by Sri Lanka Technology Campus, SLTC, under the guidance of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Chandrika Vijayarathne. SLTC is a Ministry of Education recognized non-state degree awarding higher education institution committed to delivering high-quality industry-relevant education aligned with national priorities. As a proud member of Sri Lanka Association of Non-State Higher Education Institutes and the Association of Commonwealth Universities, and ranked among Sri Lanka's leading private universities, SLTC is honored to lead this initiative as a part of our broader commitment to strengthening climate resilience and advancing sustainable development in our country. We are also deeply honored to have the Institute of Environmental Professionals Sri Lanka, IEPSL, as the strategic partner for this initiative. IEPSL is the nationally recognized professional body for environmental practitioners in Sri Lanka, dedicated to upholding professional standards while sharing expert knowledge for the benefit of the nation and the wider public. This webinar series was developed in direct response to the increasing frequency and intensity of climate-induced disasters affecting Sri Lanka. Our objective is to move beyond awareness and toward action through evidence-based discussion, professional insights, and practical strategies that can inform preparedness, policy, and implementation. Today, I'm pleased to highlight the first 3 webinars of this series were conducted very successfully with strong engagement and participation exceeding 300 participants in each session. This level of participation reflects the growing national interest and the continued relevance of the themes addressed through this forum. Building on this momentum, we are confident that today's session will further enrich and strengthen the importance of dialogue. This evening, webinar 4 focuses on the timely and critical theme, biodiversity and associated risks from storm disasters. During this session, we will explore how extreme storm events impact biodiversity, ecosystems, services, and natural habitats, examine the cascading risks to livelihoods, food systems, and human well-being, and discuss ecosystem-based adaptation, conservation strategies, and policy-relevant approaches to enhance resilience against storm-related disasters in a changing climate. Now, we are privileged to have 2 eminent experts with us today. Professor Sarath Kotagama from University of Colombo and Mrs. Shiranee Yasarathne, Biodiversity Sri Lanka, immediate past president of IEPSL. To guide and enrich us this important discussion, we are pleased to have Professor Wipula Yapa serving as the moderator for this session. And let me briefly introduce Professor Wipula Yapa. Professor Wipula Yapa is a distinguished academic, ecologist, and institutional leader with over 30 years of experience in higher education, scientific research, and quality assurance. He has held prominent roles, including Professor of Zoology and Director of Quality Assurance at the University of Colombo, where he spearheaded institutional and program reviews, shaped academic policy, and mentored both faculty and students. His research encompasses behavioral ecology, taxonomy, conservation biology, acoustic communication, and One Health approaches to emerging infectious diseases, with a particular emphasis on bat ecology and zoonotic pathogens. Currently, Professor Yapa serves as the Dean of the Faculty of Science at SLTC and as a consultant ecologist for the IdeaNet project at the University of Colombo, collaborating with international partners such as the Robert Koch Institute in Germany. He has been awarded numerous fellowships and research grants, supervised postgraduate scholars, and contributed significantly to national biodiversity assessments and conservation strategies. As a chartered biologist and former president of the Institute of Biology, Sri Lanka, Professor Wipula Yapa continues to be a leading voice in ecological research and the advancement of tertiary education. This is a free live webinar conducted via Zoom platform from 7 to 9 p.m. and participants will receive e-certificate upon successful participation. At this point, it is my pleasure to formally hand over the session to our moderator, Professor Wipula Yapa, who will take over the proceedings from onwards. Thank you once again for joining us this evening, and we wish you all very enlightening and insightful session. Over to you, Professor Wipula Yapa.
Thank you, Samantha. So am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And very warm welcome to all of you, including our two eminent speakers for today's webinar on biodiversity and associated risks from storm disaster. So we all know one of the greatest wealth in Sri Lanka lies in its biodiversity. So despite its relatively small size, the island harbors extraordinary biological richness, and Sri Lanka is recognized as one of the world's biodiversity hotspots due to its remarkable variety of ecosystems, species richness, and endemic life forms, both fauna and flora. Just to give some examples, in Sri Lanka, about 28% of flowering plants are endemic to Sri Lanka. If we take amphibians, they show a remarkable exceptional endemism, with over 85% of species are found only in Sri Lanka. Then all the freshwater crabs in Sri Lanka are endemic to island, and the list goes on and on. As such, Sri Lanka is a part of the Indo-Malayan biodiversity hotspot, and its biological diversity or biodiversity is considered disproportionately rich compared to its land size. But even before data, Sri Lankan biodiversity has continued to severely threatened due to a number of reasons, including habitat loss, pollution, invasive species, or exploitation of resources, and of course, climate change. Now, several months after Ditwa storms, we more or less know how much we have suffered as a nation. Even though not 100% accurate, we have a rough estimate. There are over 800 fatalities. Economic loss is around 16 billion US dollars. Over 20% of our rice fields or rice cultivating lands were damaged by the flood, so on and so forth. And of course, these figures are alarming. But we humans are only one species. What about the others, animals, plants, and other countless animal forms of life? They were here long before us, the true owners of this land, living for millions of years throughout history. We have shared this planet with them, often relying on them for our survival. So, yet many species have already vanished forever. One day we may be left with nothing but a list of names under a single haunting category, extinct. The sad thing, at least for me, is these species, be it animals or plants, they have no voice. and we have to be their voice. Then that is the key objective of today's webinar. We all have a responsibility as we are the policymakers, we are the scientists, we are the conservation biologists, the farmer, and also the politicians. So today's the big question is what next? To discuss these issues, we have two very renowned, eminent personalities, Professor Sarath Kotagama and Mrs. Shiranee Yasarathne, who have vast experience in conservation of Sri Lanka's biodiversity in different capacities. And as of the usual practice of this webinar series, there will be two presentations, and first by Professor Sarath Kotagama, which is followed by the presentation of Ms. Shiranee Yasarathne. And it's my duty to actually introduce Professor Sarath Kotagama, although he needs no introduction. Right? So, and it's for me personally, it's an honor to do so, as I have had the privilege of working with him very closely for over 25 years in the Department of Zoology and Environmental Science at the University of Colombo. So, Vidyadhuri Professor Sarath Kotagama is one of Sri Lanka's most respected scientists, educators, conservation leader, and he's also a renowned ornithologist, environmentalist, and an academic. And his lifelong dedication to understanding and protecting nature has shaped environmental thinking and policy in Sri Lanka and beyond. Professor Kotagama began his academic journey at the University of Colombo, where he earned his Bachelor's of Science degree with honors in zoology. And he went to complete his PhD degree at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. Over a distinguished career spanning more than 4 decades, Professor Kotagama served as a senior lecturer at the University of Colombo, then moved to Open University for a short time, and then again returned to the University of Colombo in 1997 as the first ever Professor of Environmental Sciences at the Department of Zoology and Environmental Sciences, and where he nurtured generations of students and also young scientists and led pioneering research in wildlife, biodiversity, and conservation. In addition to his academic work, Professor Kotagama has played an influential role in national and environmental governance. He was formerly served as the director of the Department of Wildlife Conservation and continues to provide scientific advice to the Ministry of Wildlife Resources and Conservation. Professor Kotagama's exceptional contribution have been recognized both locally and internationally, and he was honored with prestigious title of Vidyadhyoti, Sri Lanka's highest national award for scientific achievement, and received Distinguished Service Award for Environmental Education and Journalism from the International Society for Conservation Biology. Among numerous lists of his awards, in 2011, he was awarded National Exemplary Citizens Award, 1 out of 41, by the government of Sri Lanka, and he has won numerous presidential awards for research by the National Research Council and the Presidential Secretariat. And Deshamanya Parisarvedi Samaja Daja Deshamanya National Award from the government of Sri Lanka. And then President's Environmental Award for his excellent service rendered in the outstanding contribution sector. And he was also the nominator for the Raman Magsaysay Award. So the list goes on, but with that, with all his scientific accomplishments, Professor Kotagama has inspired countless individuals to care for Sri Lanka's rich natural heritage. He was the founding member of the March for Conservation, or better known as MFC, in the 1980s, and then Field Ornithology Group. So widely considered as unorthodox by all who know him, he had encountered with respect, admiration, and affection. He has inspired and excited his fellow students and young scientists with his originality of approach to whatever he did, both in his professional and private lives. So with that, it is my great pleasure and honor to invite Prof. Sarath Kotagama to join with us today in the evening. And over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Wipula. I hope I am audible. Thank you. And visible also. Right. Okay. So, considering time and all the details that was mentioned, I will try my best to stick with the title, because biodiversity and associated risk of disasters is a very interesting title that has come together. For many years, we have been not recognizing or not knowing what we are doing. And as usual, when we are faced with a situation of having to do something to avert the future of similar situations, we start asking ourselves, where are we? So, having got the title from Wipula, I went through it very carefully, and I decided that for the simple reason that if you try to find information on biodiversity, you will. If you go to find information on associated risks from storms with respect to biodiversity, you go into a vacuum. No information as such. There is a little here and there. Way back in 1990, in fact, in Japan, there was a seminar on the impact of natural disasters, as they used to call it, on the biodiversity. Except for that, there are articles here and there, but nothing is focused on the actual situation. Even in Sri Lanka, I will show you at then, we have not even thought of it. It's nice to be talking about it, at least through a webinar of this nature, and sensitizing ourselves that we have a bigger responsibility in terms of responding to hazards of nature. What I thought, therefore, is that we need clarity in our actions, inquiry, so that we can become more focused in what we require to change, if we need to change. And I believe that we need to change, but how to change becomes only possible if we are more focused with respect to understanding the problem that we are trying to change. So, as somebody who has been involved in the transition of biological diversity to biodiversity as a word that has become very popular across the world in almost every sphere, it is still yet to be seen, understood properly by the community, by the technical people, the scientists themselves, in fact, as to what we really mean by biodiversity. So I want to just run through. I have a pack of slides which I will try to share with you as we go along. But before all that, I want to put you in perspective of what I'm going to say. There is no hard and fast information about storm, and especially with Ditwa, or with many storms that have happened across the world, which are high and multiple in the last couple of years, 24-25 being one of the worst 2 years in the world record of huge environmental disasters. And yet, when you look at it in terms of the impacts on biological diversity or biodiversity, we find it extremely poor. So trying to impress upon you, based on what information that is available, was a daunting task. And I wouldn't try to do that in the absence of such information. But having been with the subject for many years, actually with biodiversity from 1983, long before we even adopted the word biodiversity as a technical terminology or as a common word by everybody, sort of. We were talking about it at an IUCN 13th general meeting, that there's a need to look at the animals and plants in a completely different way from the way that we were looking at it at that point of time, trying to conserve it, trying to protect them, but not really achieving the objectives. And therefore, there was a need to think differently to achieve the ultimate, which yet we have not, sadly, but yet we have made some progress in comparison to what was before 1983. Sorry, you have to excuse me for the cough which I have on and off. Right. So in 1983, it was somewhat discussed that we should be trying to focus ourselves with respect to nature's products, which I will call biological diversity, which we used to call, and I'm going to link this with our local language singular because I am not conversant with Tamil, Jiva Vidyava or Jivin or with Jiva Vividatva as it was there. Jiva, please understand, Jiva Vividatva or Jiva Vidyava, the biological sciences, and the related animals being biological organisms, Jivin. Right. This dialogue went on for some time when somewhere in 1986, at a National Academy of Science forum in the United States of America, something very strange happened. The administrative officer who was recognized as Walter Rosen, having seen the number of papers that came to be copied and distributed among the members of that conference, and having seen that in almost all the papers, the word biological diversity was repeating itself in number of times, he felt that if I reduce the word, condense it in a way, I would be able to save a lot of paper in the photocopying situation, which is what he did. So he is recognized as the person who created the word biodiversity by simply taking away a very important part of biological diversity. Because you will see biological, so the bio part still exists, the diversity part still exists, but the logic part goes away. So in a sense, as a pun, as a joke, we used to say, he decided to take away the logic of conservation, the logic of awareness creation, the attachment to life and all of that by simply dropping off logical component of biological word and combining it with diversity and creating the word biodiversity. Very strangely, the conference did not take him to task. In fact, they recognized it and were very happy because he was able to save, we are told, almost 35% of paper in the photocopying and recopying for the members. So he had achieved something through an individual decision to change a word, biological diversity, to biodiversity. So accordingly, the word biodiversity is referred to as a pseudo-cognate, meaning a word that has been coined with no objective, no meaning as such. Sorry, not with without objective. The objective was to reduce paper, but without meaning, with no real definition of what it meant. It was later picked up by E.O. Wilson and many others, biologists in the United States, and gave the required publicity and acceptance as a new form of taking it forward. But in that strategy, it also meant that this word needed to have not just a new definition, but a new objective. So we had, therefore, a set of new objectives evolving behind the word with respect to biological diversity through biodiversity. And that became the hallmark or the ignition or the fuel for the Convention on Biological Diversity, which we adopted in 1992. So the convention is not purely for biological diversity, even though it says it is the Convention on Biological Diversity. Inside that convention document, you will be strange to find that the word biodiversity does not exist. Why did it happen that way? for a very obvious reason. If biodiversity was a pseudocognate, how can you make it in a legal document? Legal documents must have words that are recognized and defined and understood. And here was the word biodiversity, which was fairly well known by that time, by 1992, used extensively in the campaigning, but yet it did not have the meat that was needed to complete the body. But within the convention, it provides for us a definition and also an objective of why we need to think of biological diversity into the future. I need to say this because it is important to understand that when you have an event that is going to affect the biodiversity or the biological diversity, we need to know what it means to decide what the effect is going to be. So within the convention, there are three aspects that are very significantly important for us to recall at this point. One, it was the animals and plants that we are all well aware of. So it was a direct thing. The idea of conserving or protecting the fauna and flora as species, because as biologists, we know that the single element of life in the scientific understanding is a species, and we try to ensure that we protect the species. But within it also was a second objective, that's the species become what they are through the expressions of what they contain. Now, sorry if you're getting confused. Who are you? Ask that question for yourself. You are what you are thought of to be based on what you have inside you. Your thinking, your background information that you have acquired over the so many years, all this in a hodgepodge put together makes you what you are. So it was very clear that you can't just only have the identified entity, but you also need to be recognizing how the entity became what it is from the various components that are within it. I will show you with my slide pack very quickly so that you will understand this jargon a little better. And thirdly, which is what is missing today in most of our conservation efforts, unfortunately, is that when we are using a plant or an animal, it is true, maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, we were using the whole plant. But in fact, it is not the whole plant that was giving us the benefit of its content. A plant, if it was being used to cure a sickness, it is not the whole plant that was doing that, but the extractive quality that contained within it. And this extractive quality that contained within the wholeness of the organism, plant or animal, needed to be recognized, and also because in the market, it is that which makes a difference. So crept into the definition was the financial side of the story. Economics comes into the picture there. We recognized just not only that within that definition, that this ultimate quality of a given plant or animal that is a savior of human life, to be very clear, because the Convention on Biological Diversity, apart from the first and second, the third one is purely targeted at humans. For human sustenance, human use, and human future. So if those are to be achieved as animals of economy, again, I am using this jargon, we are animals of economy. You toss a coin and you become what you want to be. You decide on a cent even though today we can't even see a cent. The price of an item is that what makes us decide what we want or not want. So at the end of the day, we are slaves of the economy that we put together, totally artificial. Please understand. Totally artificial. Adam Smith recognized that here is a human being, here is the animal, human, whose mind can easily be switched from left to right or to any direction that is required by manipulating the thoughts of recognizing a number. And he was successful, and we follow. And we are stuck with it today. So the convention provided in the third one a further very important aspects, that it should not be the benefit, I will put it in subtle, for only those who are capable of exploiting it, but even to the owners from where it was taken to for exploitation. So the benefit must be somewhat universal at the end of the day. And the right to permit the ultimate use would then lie with that country in which that subtle genetic material or the biological diversity was recognized to exist. So this complicated thing was put into the convention. We adopted it in 1992, and we were expected to effect it over time and find ourselves in a situation that would change our minds to enable us to conserve what is there in nature, not just simply as biological diversity or living organisms, but as biodiversity, which was directly related to humankind and its future. So with that, I'm going to jump into the slide sharing, which is trying to tell you not these very complicated things. It is important, therefore, I believe, for us to understand. I hope the slides can be seen. Can I get an answer?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you can see I have put biodiversity in green, risk, storm, disasters, all of that. So trying to understand first some very basic ideologies. We are the first generation to know we are destroying the world, unfortunately. If anybody here says we are not, I'm sorry, you are not living on this planet. The planet is sick, and that was identified not yesterday, but way back in 2000, when the Secretary General Kofi Annan decided to do the Millennium Ecosystems Assessment by looking at the factors of change in the environment that was caused by humans, 38 such indicators through more than 900 top scientists, and every indicator was negative in terms of goodness. We were sick. There was no question. So the need to be healthy at the end of the day is the subtle, simple thing that we are talking about in terms of conservation or changing response to climate change, etc., etc. Right. So this is the change that came about. Unfortunately, I could not fine tune it. So logical comes out, diversity comes with biodiversity and combines into biodiversity. Sorry, it didn't stop where it should have. And this became into the scientific literature only by 1998. Now see, this is also a very important understanding that we students of science should recognize. Simply because somebody blurbs something out and puts it in a document, don't think it will ever get recognized within a scientific document. For something to come into a scientific document, it must have logic, it must have understanding, it must have recognition of the very persons who are referring that journalistic article. So it took almost 6 years for the word biodiversity to be recognized as a scientific word in the science, even at very high levels. And when it thus became that, obviously, it was there. But you can see from the literature very carefully what it means. Biodiversity has no single standard definition, though we think we have, right? Variety of life, which refers to variation at all levels of biological organization, is a measure of the relative diversity among organisms present in different ecosystems. So there are very many different ways. There's a huge number of such definitions. I'm just putting you a few. Gaston is one person who made biodiversity, like E.O. Wilson, more popular through their publications. But he says this: biodiversity is a bandwagon, buzzword, growth industry, global resource, issue and phenomena. Response to and perception of biodiversity, a contraction of biological diversity or biotic diversity, are anything but uniform. So you see, it clearly tells us that we have a problem. At the heart of why this is so lies the issues of biodiversity actually. More authors express bewilderment or prefer weak descriptions than seek to provide robust and closely reasoned definitions. No doubt, this is at least in part a response to two things. One, we know the fact that biodiversity is a pseudocognate, which I mentioned to you, something that has been put together, is that many users assume that everyone shares the same thought. Why must you assume it? That is the thing. Are we there? Second, the variety of viewpoints about biodiversity which has developed, and these viewpoints broadly can be grouped under three headings: biodiversity as a concept, as a measurable entity, or a social or political construct. We know that they are used in all these three ways at various different places. When we wish to highlight and talk about the importance of what we have in the country, we throw in these words like this: biodiversity of the country is rich. And when Professor Wipula was introducing the background to all of these, and to me, you could see he was using it to try and impress. And it is good. It is nothing wrong. So the core problem of defining biodiversity is that it is hard to exclude anything from a concept that is taken so easily to mean everything. You have to understand that it means everything, right? Because it has these three fundamental elements: the diversity of biological entities, biological diversity, as given here. It involves the process of trying to conserve it. That does not mean just simply protecting it, because again, this is a problem that we have. We think conservation is protection. No, conservation is not protection. Conservation is protection and ensuring wise use. So you see, you have to clear your thoughts properly if you are going to get into this subject area. And thirdly, it is about utilization. If not for biological diversity, would you be alive today? If not for biological diversity, would we be talking like this today? So you see, it's an issue of using it. To say that it exists and you can't do anything about it doesn't mean and doesn't make any sense in conservation or for the purpose of what that life evolved into this planet. So under that background, there was a lot of confusion since 1992, and we were not going where we should be going with respect to achieving the objective of unifying the world towards using the convention and using the contents within it to achieve the objectives of overall fauna and flora, to put it in simple terms, protection and conservation. So the technical people who were involved with this in 1992, fortunately, I happened to be one of them. We were brought together, something like 30% of us, and we were asked in 3 days, come up and tell us what is the dilemma. Here is a set of populations who know biological diversity, and here is another set of people who are talking biodiversity. Biodiversity seems to be talking something. Biological diversity people are saying something. Can't we merge these together? Can't we bring some process to recognize this as one? So in that process and discussion, we came out with this thing where I am glad to say I had the opportunity to be the principal author of the idea. So we had tried to say biodiversity, that what came to us through Walter Rawson and then subsequently through all the users that we have been doing and the public, gives depth and width to biological diversity, which was the conventional word that existed and still exists. It has not gone away. It still exists. So the link between biodiversity and biological diversity, that is the significant and important thing. Especially for students of biology, they must be able to comprehend and understand this, which I am telling you is sadly lacking. Because we don't want to be teaching, we don't want to be doing the fundamentals in science, understanding the words. Because it's the words that make a difference in the person's thoughts. Not just only the visionary expressions that you make in front of somebody when you're trying to convey a message or teach. The words matter. I have some very long set of words which I use when I normally say, but I'm not going to do that here. But I will leave it for you to think about. Would you ever in Sinhala, would you ever in Sinhala say, Mama Ammata Alaya Karana? Think about it. Would you ever say to your mother, Amma, Mama, Oyata Alaya Karana? So you see, the fineness of language is the key to polish our thoughts for expression. Now that is where we are lost with the languages we have, because many of the languages, other than the very old languages, which are having that quality of fineness of message through the words, does not exist in the modern languages. English is one of them, sadly. So we had to make it happen. Diversity gives depth and width to biological diversity. How does it happen? So what is the depth? The depth is there in Article 2 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, where it says very clearly, the variability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, between species, and ecosystems. Now think very carefully. Do you understand what is within species? I would say, I see around 200 plus persons joining this. I won't be wrong if I say, I doubt very much 90% of the persons really understand, unless they are biological students of today, what is meant by within species. And then what is between species? Ecosystems, everybody understands. You don't need to be a biological science student to understand ecosystems. Everybody understands, at least in the context of it is that what is out there with plants and animals forming a system that is balanced or providing benefits as a result. So trying to recognize this becomes the first. Because if you are going to ask yourself, what would a disaster do to biodiversity? What would a disaster do to biodiversity? It's not just the big picture of biodiversity, it is the inner parts of biodiversity that you have to be concentrating to recognize and understand that impact. Now, we have not done it. Don't think of just Sri Lanka. Even globally, it has been very, very poor. So within species is basically what we commonly call genetic diversity. Because you all know that your face that you see every day in the morning in the mirror is a result of that diversity that is within you, the genetics. Yes, of course, you can change it by doing some manipulations, but what you were born and what you acquired as you became older is a result of that genetics within you, which expressed in your face. And that is based on this double helix and so on. Then what is between species? Again, something which we are all aware of. There's nothing new. All these things that you see, the different kinds, which Wipula very clearly said at the very beginning, Sri Lanka is proud. And we are very happy to be able to tell the world that we have a biological diversity that is rich and unique compared to the world. As he was just mentioning, crabs, almost 99% of the crabs are endemic to Sri Lanka. What it means very clearly is that they are found nowhere else but only in Sri Lanka. That is very unique, and there is about 30 plus in that. So it's a fairly large number. So when you say the endemicity of insects is high, plants almost like 35% to 40% and so on, all of that means that there are these very, very special plants and animals that are found nowhere else in the world and only in Sri Lanka. That is all put together into the second species diversity, different kinds of species that exist. We will not try to recognize water species here because that's a long narration. And then you come to the third component, which is the ecosystem's diversity. The plants and animals come together, interact, and produce a product which is balanced, which exists in nature, and therefore it is for the future. And that is what we know: a forest, a wetland, the coastline, a river, a stream, you can name it depending on how you define it. But these ecosystems, which have self-sustaining capabilities and abilities, become that higher level, third level. So very simply, it is that genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystems diversity is what we mean by biological diversity in that sense. But there is also something else, because we said the depth and the width. What is width? Besides biology, biology is the subject that looks and studies animals and plants, that various kinds and their lifestyles and etc. etc. Besides that study area, which is biology, wildlife, ecological research, biotechnology, gene banking, pharmaceuticals, forestry, coastal management, economics, human rights, equity, agriculture, consumption, trade, intellectual property rights, indigenous knowledge, and it goes on, the list goes on, are all significantly important for biodiversity. Today, intellectual property rights is a key factor of recognizing the genetic uniqueness that we may have in Sri Lanka and its identity as something that nobody else can exploit. It then thus becomes a property and an intellectual property and a right that we have. Now, how do you get it effected? It's not looking at the plant. It's not looking at the animal. It is affecting the legal systems. So you see, all of these are part of that story. So you have very clearly to be recognizing. Now remember, I am putting all of these things to you. Maybe new, maybe old, you may have known, but when we are asking about the associated risk of a storm or a natural disaster, all of these are affected. Have we done anything about it due to DITWA? You can go into the internet, which is, of course, the pathway that we have for information, and you will see that the UN reports and all of these reports, they have talked a lot, but no biodiversity. Nothing about the economics or the cost of what we have lost in the biological ecosystems arena? Nothing. Only in some reports, some mention has been done saying, yes, we lost the forest, we lost the water bodies, they got filled by mud and slum, refuse, all of that. But what is the impact? What is the cost of that impact if we were to rectify it, and if that rectification involves labor, costing of material to rectify? So you see, the width matters a lot in biodiversity or biological diversity. So having recognized that, we can just simply ask the next set of slides. I'm going to go very quickly because most of you all will be aware of these things, but maybe not properly understanding, but you are aware. So why is biodiversity important accordingly? We have something called direct and indirect uses and values. Some of it is directly relevant to you. Some of it comes round the corner, somewhere from there to you. And these values make you decide as to whether you like it or dislike it, and so on. So the whole set, we know, basically, values are subjective. You can't put a value and say, this is it. It doesn't exist. It is subjective because the value I have on a wetland may not be what even my own family members will have. Our students will have different values. The administrators will have different values. The politicians will have different values. The common man on the road will have different values, and so on. Does he have a value at all even? Is that we have to ask. So these are just quick runs. Local communities, oil company, aquaculture, all of these people have different values about this wetland. And it goes on. If you put a price tag on nature's ecological services, which is something that came to be very, very recent, you can see there is a lot of value there. Estimated value of Earth's ecological services, $33.2 trillion per year. It's very, very low when you really think of it. But it is that what we have in the science of assessments that we have done so far. There's an intrinsic, inherent value that is worth protecting regardless its value to humans. Now, what is the intrinsic and inherent value that you are talking about? It may be something that you have as a member of the family, member of the community, member of the country, etc., and a member of the planet. It is something that cannot be valued, but it is a value. It is something that is felt within oneself and you promote it thereafter. A very difficult concept. If somebody asks, why do you do this? You may be lost in trying to find the right answer to convince the person. A picture, okay, let's put it in a more subtle way. I think we are all good adults that are listening to this. I hope there are no children. We say the beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. Beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. What is beautiful? It all depends on how you see it. But would you like to accept it? That you decide as what you see is beautiful in the way you see it. So therefore, somebody else may not see it the same way. And that is that intrinsic value that we put in biodiversity. There's a lot that we need to recognize. Then, of course, the very simple one, which is the easier one, which is called the extrinsic, utilitarian, and instrumental value. Now, these are all economic jargon. But as I told you, we are economic slaves. Sorry, but that is it. So we need to understand these things a little bit to be able to change somebody's attitudes if we are attempting to conserve something or attempting to protect or attempting them to understand for the future. What is the value of something for the future? Why must you be preserving something that doesn't seem to give you anything. But if it gives you something, and which you can feel, which you will, as I said, the scent does matter, even though we don't think so. The prices of shoes, $499.99. Where is that last cent? But it matters because the next one is $599.99. The difference is 100. But they don't say $499 and then $599. They put a 99 cent also, because we know that it matters. A number of ecological services to humankind that have economic, aesthetic, and recreational value. This is the extrinsic, the outside value, not the inside. Now, I'm sure many of you all go to the campus as part of your need to get your degree. And many of those who are teaching go to the campus to teach, because you have to do it for the children. And I can go on like that. But you're not going to go there without wearing something, are you? It is this extrinsic factor of clothes that makes an impression of who you are in the real sense of a judgment, if a judgment is to be made. So that's the idea of an extrinsic value. It's there outside, which you can look at and make a judgment. And those are put in the economic jargon, extrinsic, utilitarian, and instrumental values or cost, and so on. Right. So biodiversity is the basis for our existence, our life support system, air, water, food, shelter, trees, plants, microorganisms, each specifically adapted to its particular niche, fauna, flora, all of that. So quickly go through. I'm not going to go through the details here. Direct use values, goods, building material, fuel, paper, fiber, industry, medicine, all of that you are aware of. Food, a direct use from biological diversity. We may not like what we see, but well, that is it. In some countries, this is food. Marine and freshwater food resources. 25% of all fish stocks are endangered because we are eating too much fish and otherwise, and also polluting, and therefore they are not reproducing adequately. Building materials, paper products, and fuel. Fiber, your cloth, the cotton cloth is coming from cotton. It's not coming from nothing. It's the plant that gives us that. Many industrial products, from the cork to wax plants, giving all of these things, rubber, shellac, jojoba oil, all of that. It matters directly to our health. Clean air and water, extracts, derivatives from most of the medicines, they all come from plants, etc., which matter to our health. We are all aware of what happened with COVID. That's nothing, not an inanimate object. It was an animate. It was a virus, a living entity. And we saw what happened to us. We became totally incompetent for a couple of days until we overcame with it. With our ability, we must say. But before that, we have had 30 such emerging infectious diseases. COVID becomes a pandemic. We were able to overcome it with strategic changes in our conventional thinking also. If we had got stuck to our conventional thinking, let me assert you, to let you know, we would have never ever got over the problem. I'll just leave you with the thought, just look at it. The conventional thinking for safety sakes and all of that, what matters when you develop a vaccine to be vaccinated, is that it must at least go through 10 years of testing. 10 years of testing. Ask yourself, did we wait for 10 years to test the vaccines that we were vaccinated with? Next, ask yourself, you have a vaccine done in a matter of 20 days, 30 days, or sometimes maybe 5 days, I don't know, whatever express times that they used it for to get it done. did not wait to do the, what we call the covering tests and all of that, double-blind tests, name it, all of these things which are required in the normal scientific system for protective purposes. Because here people are falling, and here you are trying to develop a vaccine because you know vaccines do work against viruses. With all the experience that we have had, with many that we have had in the past. But can you wait for 10 years as the WHO has it in their guideline? We couldn't. So what did we do? We developed a vaccine in the shortest possible time and gave it to people. But see, I will leave with one thought and I will leave you to do the analysis. Ask yourself, what is the age at which we gave the vaccine first? Why did we have to do it at that age and not any age below? I leave it to you. It's very important for you to understand, because these are the facts that will enable your thinking to recognize the impacts of a natural hazard. I'm using the word hazard, a natural occurrence that results in a disaster for mankind. How do you respond to such a disaster? It can't be an envelope. It can't be just a piece of cloth covering everything. No, it has to be selective. And the selectiveness of that is based on these background knowledges. So ask yourself, not just only the first vaccine that was given to the first group of people, the second was given to another group of people when we found that it was working in the first. Why did we do for that age group? Maybe somewhere down the line you will hear me say that. So a lot of medicines come from nature. Today we have put a lot of effort to recognize what is called the ecosystem's services, because that is what matters from nature ultimately for us in a way. The benefits that we reap from this collective system, which is the ecosystem. Now here you can see at once what would happen if that system breaks down. The benefits that we would be getting would not come. So who is going to be the victim? We are going to be the victim. The hazard brought with it disaster. And the disaster is human. Humans see nature lost, disaster. But a hazard is a natural process that will always happen in nature. So clearly differentiating these words are very important to understand the results and the risks associated with such activities on the biological diversity that we are trying to recognize. So many functions: filtration, flood protection, soil and water are all biodiversity products. There's a whole heap of indirect uses and services that we can recognize as a result. Atmospheric regulation, the balance, the climate, we are talking all of this in terms of climate, how the carbon dioxide, how the nitrogen oxides, all of them are in the atmosphere to given concentrations. Climate regulation, obviously, are part of biological diversity. Soil and water conservation, nutrient recycling. If not, there can't be plants. If not plants, we can't be surviving, and so on. Pollination and seed dispersal, all matters that are required and will happen only through biological diversity or biodiversity. Information, as was just mentioned by Professor Yapa, for biomimicry, which is now becoming a major source of inspiration for technology in building constructions, in applications for many areas where we are trying to imitate in a way, mimic in a way, that what is found in nature. So is the nature-based solutions that we are trying to do in terms of construction, in terms of manipulations of the natural systems, to ensure that what we have done all these years without considering the biological background, the nature, the environment needs to stop, and we must go back and look at nature, understand, and make use of them. So biomimicry is one of that. Jenny and Bison in 1989 gave that word to us, even though we have been using it as inspirations of nature prior to the single word coming. So we still have that nature-based solutions, again 2002 and onwards. So all of these are very important for not just biological students, technological students to understand what it means, because these are the solutions that are emerging out for the technological problems that we have created on this planet to date. Trauma patients, kidney diseases, osteoporosis are being looked at through the bear. I won't go into the details. Spiritual and cultural values. We in Sri Lanka know it better. We have a tree which is 2,500 years old, right? We revere it. At least the majority of the members of the country do respect it, and we believe in it, and we think that it provides us and duplicates which we think are there across the country. So that is a spiritual. Cultural values also come. The way that we use, let's say, as an example, which you can look at, the betel leaf. Try to find out the use of the betel leaf in society. Not just to mulch it up and eat it and get yourself cancered. That is just one bad part of it. But there are many positive social aspects of the betel leaf. Just look at it. Just think about it. All those comes from culture. Beauty of nature, aesthetics. We know why it is declining. You have recognized it, climate change as one. What is the impact in Sri Lanka? Dr. Dhanapala and Somarathne did some work way back in the 1980s and published this. What would happen? Very obvious, our wet zone will become dry and our dry zone will become drier, and we have to wait for it. Well, it's not going to happen immediately, but it is happening, as we know. From the data from the department, we know that the temperatures are changing pretty fast and it is increasing. So maybe what Dr. Dhanapala and Somarathne professed in the research publication many years ago is just exactly happening now. Extreme temperature changes are not yet visible, but temperature changes at Norelia, temperature changes in Kurunagala, temperature changes in parts of the dry zone at different places are happening already. So declining of wildlife, we know all about it. We know the picture on the right-hand bottom is that from Thotupotakanda in 1968. At least when the trees were dying, the tree stumps were there. But today you don't see anything. So why is it happening? Many reasons for it. It's the same that is happening in Sri Lanka. Changing habitats for multiple purposes of different uses, maybe for plantations, for cities, and all of this it is doing. So all of this is about nature, conservation, well-being of the people's community, and economics. Now see what would happen. I'm skipping that. So ultimately, summarizing based on the time that I'm having, biodiversity is the lifeline of the nation. Now, if something is going to affect that, if it is going to affect your lifeline, you are going to have a problem. You have to ask yourself, what would be the cost of that exercise? So it's very interesting as to what has happened so far with respect to Yapa. Natural events change nature. We know that. We understand that. We don't have to tell that. Right? When it rains, it floods. When it is too hot, the leaves wither. That's normal. Nothing unusual. But if it goes beyond the limit, then it becomes an impact. Small changes within resilience of the system swings back to the same state earlier. But large permanent changes beyond the resilience of the system swings the system into a new state. These are all only academic interests. But it is important. Resilience of nature, though we have not researched to understand. Now, have we done research to understand the resilience of pain of the individuals who are listening to me today? But when somebody pinches you, you either swing and hit him or you look the other side. And it all depends on who pinches you also, no? So the nature of the pinch, the person who pinched, the magnitude, the pain that comes out of the pinch, all of these are factors which will reflect in your response to the pinch. That is what we call resilience of the person. It's the same in nature. You can play around with nature, but to a point, because nature has the ability to turn around, get back to where it is. That is the factor of resilience in an ecosystem. Some are very resilient, some are very poor. And poor systems collapse and break down quickly. Resilient systems are able to bear the brunt and still get back to where it is. And that's what happens. Now we come to the word natural hazard. I have used it once or twice as I went along. When unpredictable natural events become extreme in their occurrences, they may constitute a danger to humans and their members of the environment. Such an event then defines a natural hazard. When it is with nature, why worry about natural hazards? They cause damage, loss of life, cause emotional stress and trauma, disrupt the life systems, and they are increasing. We saw it with Yapa, okay? But then how does it change with a disaster? As I said, we had this publication, which I managed to fish out, way back in the 90s. A serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society involving widespread human, material, economic, and environmental losses and impacts which exceed the ability of the affected community or society to cope using its own resources. Then it is called a disaster. So that's why a hazard is something that happens, but put it in an ecological sense, is within the resilience, and therefore the system will revert back to being normal. A disaster is judged through human eyes. So theoretically, in the jargon of the language, you cannot have natural disasters. But we have gone to use it so extensively that we have lost the definitional purpose of the word disaster. You have natural hazards and human disasters or artificial disasters. A disaster affects the human kind. A hazard affects the natural system. And the two may be completely different in terms of judgment, measurement, and accordingly, the response that is going to come back. A wetland can get closed down by excess of water, flooding. But being a wetland, which has a very high resilience capacity, it will restore back itself in the shortest possible time. But that same water might flood a city, bring down a couple of buildings, change the landscape totally through the change of soil structure, through a drift, landslide. And can you bring that mountain back? You can't. But the impact of that is not in nature itself, but it is with us. The result of 30 people getting covered by soil as a result of the moving earth is a disaster. But forget the humans as humans, but as animals, then it is a hazard. That's all. So these are very interesting ways that these things are looked at. I'm going to skip this and see what you get, the disaster types. There are geophysical disasters, there are hydrological disasters, there are meteorological disasters, there are climatological disasters, biological disasters, and extraterrestrial disasters. All of these has one thing in common. They affect mankind. They affect us. When it does happen that way, we call it a disaster. If not, it is a natural hazard, defined on the human consequences of a natural hazard and not on the phenomena that caused it. So what is the risk therefore? Again, a very interesting word, risk. Because if you don't properly define it, again, you get lost in what we are trying to achieve. Disaster, in terms of the Sri Lankan's Disaster Management Act and Committee Council, we have a serious disruption of the functioning of a society, causing widespread human environmental losses which exceed the ability of the affected society to cope using only its own resources. Nothing about nature. Nothing about the ability of the system to bounce back. It's all to do with what we can achieve once it has been affected. An occurrence of a widespread severe damage, injury or loss of life or property with which a community cannot cope and during which the society undergoes severe disruption. Who is the community? Human community. So you see, we have all the legislations, all the definitions centered around the human. Where is it centered around nature? It becomes a hazard. Let me give you a simple example. If you were around when tsunami struck Sri Lanka, there was a commission appointed to look into the details of the impact. I had to go and give evidence. So in my own way, as like what I'm trying to present to you, which is sometimes considered a little cynical by many people sometimes, but that is science. If you are willing to look and work with science, you have to be very, very clear. You can't be vacillating. Science progresses only when you are clear with the science. So at that inquiry, when I said from Palo to Pana, east right up to Panama, the tsunami struck straight on to Sri Lanka. But not a single human life was lost. From Palo to Pana, which is inside Yala National Park, where we lost 19 Japanese personnel, all the way going south, round the country, and coming up Southeast Asia to Panama, where the first human habitation was, there was not a single man who was killed. So I said that stretch of Sri Lanka was subject to not a disaster, but to a hazard, a natural hazard. What was the impact of that hazard? How many animals would have died when that water came into the landscape? We lost 1,500 people at Perelia, 200 people at Hambantota. And as we go the list, we lost so many buildings, constructions, all of that. But with them, we may know how many cats we lost, because at least the people, if they were around, they would know that the cat was lost. But even that was sometimes not documentable. How many dogs? Because the owners themselves didn't exist. They may themselves have gone as a victim of the situation. But apart from that, how many lizards died? How many rats died? How many amoebas died? This is a unicellular animal I'm talking. How many insects died? Absolutely nothing. There's no reference at all. So where is the accountability for assessment and rehabilitation of the natural system when you do not know what you have even lost, to what extent it made a change in the natural system? You see, we are lost. Even with Ditwa, it is just that fact. And coming to the reality of recognizing the risk of all what has happened. Again, a very interesting word, that an event will cause X amount of damage. The statement of probability that an event will cause X amount of damage. Economic impact on monetary terms that an event will cause. These are easy to assess. The simple way that I say is, when you cross a road, do you not know that a vehicle can hit you? But you do cross the road, not by the white line, but outside. You are taking a risk of being hit by a vehicle, but because you know that the vehicles are plying on the road. If the road does not have vehicles moving, you don't have a risk of being knocked down by a vehicle. So you can take your own time and cross the road. Risk is zero. But there is a risk on a road where vehicles are moving, because it can knock you down. So you will make a judgment as to whether I should take the risk or not. So these are all calculable, which are there. Coming to another word that we have to understand with this title that is there given to me. I'm coming to the end of the story. Degree of loss, which is vulnerability, resulting from potentially damaging phenomena. How damaging, how big has it been? From 0 to 100%, is it insignificant or very significant, at least in that sense? So the vulnerability is done that. So all these are there in the literature. Potential disaster losses in lives, assets, livelihoods, which would occur to a particular community or society over some specified future time period. That's disaster risk. Hazard, exposure, and vulnerability are again three very important words to understand the title you gave me, but time is running out. Consist of three independent elements: hazard, what has happened, Ditwa, how much of the landscape was exposed to it, and how vulnerable was those elements that were exposed to it. They all come together as one picture to judge the disaster element. So risk, hazard, vulnerability, exposure put together. Ditwa comes in. We all know what happened. Very unusual. A similar one happened only way back in 1974 or 76, if I can recall, where it went across the country, putting down many trees and all of that. And when everything finished, when it was mapped, it went through the landscape, which was deforested for multiple purposes. So even here, when we know what has happened at the end of the day, we know whether we like it or not, whether it is nice to say or not, the fact of the matter is that much of the impact has been in places where we basically didn't follow the land guidelines of developing the land in the right way. I'm not going to mention what it is, but I do believe you understand, and it is all that. So we had all these situations, flooded, because it's what unusual, landslides, all of this was there completely. The amount of water that fell from the sky was unprecedented. And here is what I'm going to show you, which I'm going to close up. This is the UN assessments. The total damage is estimated at US dollars, the UNDP, actually UNDP and the UN systems assessment, 4.1 billion, which is 4% of the Sri Lanka's GDP. Kandy was the worst hit district in terms of estimated damage, US dollars 689 million. All of Sri Lanka's 25 districts were impacted by flooding and extreme rainfall. Infrastructure damage was estimated at US dollars 1.73.5 billion. Agriculture damage is estimated at US dollars 814 million. Residential buildings damage, including contents, accounted for US dollars 985. Non-residential buildings and content damage accounted for US dollars 562. Total direct damage by district, all mapped up. Total damage by sector, residential, non-residential, infrastructure, agriculture has been assessed. But there's nothing on biodiversity. Nothing on biodiversity. Nothing of the cost or the loss. Forget the cost, the loss of biological diversity in any of the assessments that followed DITWA. That is the sad reality. Well, maybe you can argue that comes after. Humans matter first. So therefore, we have done what is required for humans, not what humans live on. That's a very strange argument. Our livelihoods, our sustenance is on the biological diversity. And if that is not going to be looked at, to enable it to be rectified or brought back or assisted to come back, to provide the direct and indirect benefits that we know the system provided for us. If we are not doing that, then don't you think that we have a huge vacuum in our social and economic systems? This is the picture of where the diversity of vegetation exists in Sri Lanka, and superimpose the impact of DITWA, and you can see we have affected some of the most critical systems, which is right at the middle of the country. Kandy, Norelia, Knuckles, and the rest of it here. The most diverse part of the country. So imagine the biodiversity loss. The fact of matter is that we have no information of site-specific inventories anyway, so it makes it even worse. So that is the reality. The risk associated with hazards becoming disasters with the human coming into the picture, sadly, has not been assessed. We can talk about it. I have still not seen a single publication on it. But we know that some people have said, well, we may have lost so much, we have made so much and all that. But these are all what we saw. What we say is immediate responded publications. They are not researched publications, but we need to do it. Because following with that is the valuation of that loss and recognizing how to respond, how to bring it back. Can you bring it back? We don't know. We are yet to know whether when a landslide has happened, with it, there is one very significant feature in this country, in the biodiversity, which is point endemism. Meaning that some endemics are found only in very, very narrow areas of the country. Point endemism. And if it was the case of one point endemics in a given landslide area, where would it be after? We have no idea, because we have still not ventured out to find out. So that is the situation here. Future still is the same. We do learn lessons, but we do not build those lessons into our norms of life, unfortunately. That's again another problem we humans have, not just only in the developing countries, but sometimes even in the developed countries. So we need to continue to venture to find out the impacts of hazards, which become disasters, which has a cost factor, which we try to therefore ensure will not ultimately affect mankind. So thank you very much. I know I have tried hard to not put heavy weight on you, but these are simple things. The summary is, yeah, people died, people lost property, infrastructure was changed. How much of forest went away? How much of animals lost? We still don't have an assessment, sadly. So the biodiversity with respect to the three major events, some of them may be the lifeline of the nation. We don't know. So to be at that point means that we have a huge vacuum in terms of information gathering when a hazard occurs and if that hazard is a disaster to mankind. So thank you very much. I believe we will have a question and answer session at the end after Shiranee Yasarathne has spoken. So leaving with these thoughts, again, thank you very much for inviting me, for enabling me to provide to you a completely different picture of what probably a completely different picture from what you might have expected. The reality of the fact is that we are nowhere close for assessment or assessing the impact of a hazard on the biological diversity at the moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
I think I took the hour, but
yeah, I saw that. Thank you very much, sir. So as it has been always been, it's an eye opener to me, and I'm sure it is for many in the audience as well. And now, as you proposed, I will first now invite Mrs. Yasarathne to deliver his speech. Just to give a very brief introduction about Mrs. Shiranee Yasarathne. Mrs. Yasarathne, who is a distinguished environmental professional, she has decades of leadership experience in biodiversity conservation of Sri Lanka. She is also, just like Professor Kotagama, an alumni of the University of Colombo, specialized in zoology. And she held a number of very important posts, mostly related to biodiversity conservation. She is the immediate past president of the Institute of Environmental Professionals, Sri Lanka, and currently serves as a senior technical advisor at the Biodiversity Sri Lanka. And also, she was the former country representative of the IUC in Sri Lanka, that is the International Union of Conservation Nature. And with an academic background that includes an MSc in biochemistry, molecular biology, gene technology, and of course, as I mentioned, BSc honors in zoology. She's also a member of the Institute of Biology of UK and a chartered environmentalist. So in recognition of Ms. Yasarathne's outstanding contribution to environmental conservation, she was also awarded the Sonta Women Achievement Environment in 2006. So it's my, again, great pleasure and privilege to invite Mrs. Yasarathne to join with us and deliver her speech. Over to you, Ms.
Thank you very much, Professor Yapa. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, of course, we can hear you, Professor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a great privilege for me to speak after my own guru, Professor Kotagama. And of course, his illustrious speech is very hard for me to compete with. So just bear with me for a few minutes on this presentation that I have. So basically, I think he covered a lot of elements of biodiversity, how biodiversity, he spoke about how fragile it is and how important it is to life. And basically, I think I will try my best to speak a little bit about the economic consequences of storms and disasters of this nature. Now, the macro impact, I think Professor Kotagama already spoke, and he said that the DITWA, the economic loss was estimated at about 4.1 billion US dollars. And this is was a big blow to Sri Lanka when it was just trying to recover from its post-2022 economic crisis. So we also had great impacts on agriculture, on tourism, and of course, infrastructure. And that alone was estimated to reach up to about US dollars 7 billion. So it was quite a huge problem to us. And I think events of this nature will only recur as time goes on. So now, extreme events of this nature is due to climate variations. And also, of course, there is natural climatic variability, Sri Lanka being positioned where it is. And of course, we have impacts from the Bay of Bengal and other, from India in particular. And then these cause heavy rainfall, flooding, and of course, the wind velocity. We also know that, I think Professor also mentioned that warmer oceans fuel heavier rainfall. And it is known that the Indian Ocean has warmed faster than the global norm. And it increases moisture availability for cyclonic systems. So natural systems are also, because of the impacts of climate change, there is more and more incidences of this situation. So we may have to comply with these as we move on. So we have had flood risks mostly in the Central Highlands. And I think you know that most of our biodiversity is in the Central Highlands. And also we have heavy impacts on low-lying coastal plains. I saw many questions being asked about wetlands and the valuations. I mean, when the Central Highlands are, affected, the low-lying coastal plains also get heavily affected. Then we also had very intense rainfall, and we saw that within a space of a day or so, we had a very, very high rainfall, which Sri Lanka could not contend with. And also together with that, we have rapid urbanization. I mean, everybody knows that we have large concentrations of people and in low-lying areas, in coastal areas, and also our infrastructure has been built in areas that are frequented by floods and also in very steep terrain. I think Professor mentioned that people are an important element in this whole equation. I think in poverty-stricken countries like Sri Lanka, in developing nations with a high population, we have rapid urbanization mostly in very vulnerable areas. Here you have the agricultural land use and, of course, the extreme rainfall during Cyclone Ditwa. So you can see that the whole country, actually, most of it was affected with very high rainfall. And you can see in the darker green patches that we have very high agricultural land use, which was mostly affected by the storm. We also had, as you can see in the green patch, the landslides that we had were mostly in the central zone of the country. As you know, most of our tea plantations and also our, rubber plantations are in these kinds of areas. So one of the sectors that got very strongly affected by this whole flood, by this whole storm, was the plantation sector. And we now know that there have been many assessments and damage that has been caused to this sector, which is quite a big problem to the plantation community. Now, as you can see, the areas that were affected most were coastal zones and the fisheries. The risk level is very high. Water resources is also high, and we know that there was a lot of talk about water being contaminated by floods and also variability. The agricultural sector is affected badly because of stressors in rainfall. Also, in other cases, we have heat stressors. Health is one big factor that comes into play when we have changes in this sort. Tourism is another sector that is affected badly because we have coastal erosion and extremes of climate cause a lot of damage to the tourism sector, and of course infrastructure, which we all know. And I mentioned before that the damage that was caused went into billions of dollars. The economic sectors that Sri Lanka is relying on is mostly affected by extreme weather incidents of this nature. If you take the plantation sector, The systems that we have tea, rubber, coconut, spices, agroforestry as part as in our plantation sector. Climate vulnerability is very high, especially in the coconut and the spices, and in tea it is medium to high. And as I said, the key risks are heat stress, quality, rainfall variability. There can be diseases, and of course, agroforestry is affected with severe drought. Now, biodiversity-wise, Prof mentioned a lot of factors that affect biodiversity, but sectorally, Sri Lanka with Ditwa was affected badly in the Central Highlands, and as you know, it's very biodiversity rich and suffered huge landslides. And it uprooted trees and buried forest landscapes. And also we had a lot of problems in Horton Plains, Knuckles Conservation Forest, where there was severe damage as a result of this storm. Now, wildlife there are severe impacts on wildlife as a result of floods, and also other climate exigencies. Floods cause significant livestock losses, and of course, human-wildlife encounters as animals are driven away from their normal sort of, routes that they sort of move around in. So we had, as Prof said, there is no estimate as yet, but we do know that there was a lot of problems with wildlife because of the flood. Then water management was severe. The destruction of around 1,777 tanks, 483 dams, and 1,936 canals were severely damaged because of this recent storm that we had. So water management becomes extremely important as a result of these sort of events. And the long-term environmental damage cannot be accounted for. There is a degradation of natural buffers, and we talked a lot about wetlands and the impacts that they have contributed to the severity of the floods, and also highlighting the vulnerability of the ecological infrastructure that we have. Now, as was said, we can talk a lot about this, but how do we sort of get ready and don't really look at the emergency response that we always, do very, very well after these emergencies take place. So basically, I think the professor mentioned that the nature-based solutions is one of the rocks that we can build on. And these are ecosystems that are resilient enough to absorb shocks. So if we work on this, I think it is really important that I know these solutions are long-term, but we really need to map out the vulnerable areas and start looking at ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction methodologies. Now, where wetland restoration is concerned, revitalizing urban wetlands, especially around the Kalani River, becomes absolutely important. These areas, I'm happy to say that we are involved in the organization that I represent, Biodiversity Sri Lanka, in mapping some of these wetland areas around the Kalani River, which act as a natural sponge, absorbing excess water, and Muthuraja Valley, etc., becomes so important in these flood retention, the roles that they play. I think Professor Kotagama spoke of ecosystem services, and one of the services that these wetlands provide is that they become a sponge for the flood waters that come by. So one of the things that we are beginning to do is to get the private sector to invest in wetland restoration. I know it's a long-term process. It is not easy. It's very expensive. But these are the only ways that we can actually look at ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. Then reforestation becomes also very important. And I think there are efforts being made to look at the species diversity in restoration, not just planting with as monocultures, but in the Central Highlands, we need to prioritize where we look at types of flora which are deep-rooted. However, I must say that in some of the cases, the landslides occurred mostly in forested areas in the Central Highlands, and that was really alarming because there has been a lot of infrastructure that has come around near these in these forested areas, and quite a lot have been in very vulnerable cases. Some of them are illegal. Some of them have not been constructed according to plan. So then what happens? The system gets fragile, and the forest areas that are quite secure normally become very vulnerable. So reforestation efforts must go hand in hand with infrastructure around the various areas that we work with. And these things are science-based, and we need to have a lot of guidelines from the forest department, etc., on how to do these types of things. Now, I know that a lot of companies that we work with are interested in reforestation, but we stress that these must be done under guidance of experts and not people who just go in there and start planting. It's not really that. So the future reforestation efforts must look at how the canopy cover and also the root systems of these trees become prone to, helping crises like this and don't, exacerbate landslides, etc. Okay, so we also have now the coastal buffers also become equally important because strengthening the mangrove belts and the coral reefs provide a physical break against storm surges. I mean, we know that from the tsunami of 2004, I think. And we had areas that were strong in mangroves, which really prevented the storm from coming in. So we are also looking at strengthening mangrove belts and looking at coral reefs that perhaps also act as natural barriers, and this is also a nature-based solution but of course I must also emphasize that these efforts take a really long time to come up with the benefits that they bring about. So we need to be aware that whatever we do is going to be not immediate, and it is more or less a thing that will take a lot of time. Now, I think it was also mentioned that wildlife corridors, creating protected high ground corridors allows animals to migrate safely during floods, reducing drowning of deaths and human-wildlife conflict. And, this is something that is being looked at in various places. We have studied about 270 odd estates in 6 districts and found that there are very high biodiversity rich areas in these estates and also corridors that can be set up so that these can then act as high ground corridors for animals to migrate. So efforts are being made by the plantation sector and they are being assisted by scientists on how to look at these wildlife corridors that can actually create some refugia or connectivity to these animals that get affected by these floods. Then for critically endangered flora in the Knuckles range, maintaining off-site seed banks and botanical nurseries ensure that a single landslide doesn't lead to total extinction. Now, there are many species that, are endemic to Sri Lanka, and, you need to look at maintaining off-site seed banks in various places. And also there are efforts being made by the private sector led by the University of Colombo and also the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, where they are looking at doing ex situ gene banks for critically endangered flora in various places. So efforts are being made. It's not that nobody is taking action, but these things need more scientific rigor and also more action on ground. Now, this is something that we just have to look at because you see, it is important that we map the high-risk biodiversity areas, ecological hotspots that need physical reinforcement or priority evacuation for rare species. Now, this mapping, as Prof mentioned, is lacking. It's not being done, and I think it's not difficult to do. We need to really map where our biodiversity is rich, just like we did for the 260 odd estates where the high biodiversity value forests were, determined. So this mapping and with satellite imagery, it's not that difficult to do. And I think that action should be taken. And I'm hoping that it is a part of the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan that is being revised. We also have to see bioindicators, monitoring of the behavior of sentinel species. I think there are certain species of amphibia, birds, which are a part of the early warning systems, as they often react to barometric changes before technology does. So bioindicators, is another one that we need to work more at, because these species really know how to warn others. And they become early warning systems and they actually react to, and we know that in the tsunami, there were so many examples of these where elephants, etc., they have the vibrations and they know that something is going to happen, so that we really need to use nature's indicators a little bit more in situations of this nature. Now, one thing that we really have to look at, and this is because we have had a big impact on our Central Highlands, we have to learn from our natural systems because climate extremes increase landslide risks. The loss of vegetation reduces slope resilience, and biodiversity enhances ecosystem stability, and vulnerable landscapes require nature-based solutions. So we need to learn from natural systems which are not tampered with. And as I mentioned, a lot of the natural forests that we have have had anthropogenic effects. We are working in a forest in Carnelia Conservation Zone, which has been totally parts of it have been burned for chaina cultivation, and today it is covered with kakilla, which is near invasive. And the whole natural forest has been, affected. So if there is a system that has not been affected, there are lots of lessons that we can learn from these natural ecosystems when we deal with climate extremes. So we need to sort of map these out and start looking at where we could learn from and what we can learn from these. Now, the emerging realities are that recurrent slope instability affects landslides. And then, of course, we have they disrupt field operations and transportation routes. They damage infrastructure. There's severe soil erosion and long-term productivity loss, unpredictable supply chains, and escalating rehabilitation and maintenance costs. So these are some of the emerging realities that we have to contend with when we look at some of the work that is going on. Now, some of the key principles that I suppose we have to look at is when we look at canopy cover, we look at multi-layered canopy cover and not these, single species, which are really not really going to do much justice, and the root system is sparse and it's not thick, so it doesn't really help much. And the deep root systems help in soil reinforcement and also buffering and infiltration enhancement. Now in the tea area, we are looking at enriching shade tree systems in tea. And of course, we are looking at reforesting abandoned estate blocks. Now, in the same work that we are doing, we are identifying where you get areas which have been abandoned in tea estates, and looking at rewilding, because rewilding also will support in combating effects such as these disasters. Now, agroforestry systems for biodiversity stability is also something that is being looked at. There are perennial tree crop combinations that can be used, mixed species belts along contours, and species interactions and synergy. Now, the benefits that we get, the multi-layered canopy I spoke earlier, reduces rainfall impact. The deep and lateral roots reinforce soil at multiple depths. So actually, I think the benefits of the multi-layered tree canopy cover cannot be emphasized more. And of course, it creates habitat diversity, the diversity that was spoken of earlier, and of course, enhances soil water retention. So efforts that are being made for reforestation should be looking at natural systems and not single species that are being planted in some places. Now, riparian systems is also as important. These systems stabilize the river banks, are very, very important. They filter sediment and improve water quality, and they add habitat corridors. So we are also looking at riparian buffer restoration in some of the tea estates that we work in. And there is a lot of work going on looking at native species, and also looking at the kind of fauna and flora that would support these riverbanks to act as riparian buffers. So these are also important. Then I spoke earlier also about the high elevation biodiversity corridors, where they connect fragmented habitats, they reduce wildlife isolation, and support long-term ecological resilience. Efforts are being made. Some of these biodiversity corridors have already taken shape, and the results of these are being seen in certain plantation sector and in other systems. So there are stories to learn from, and I think more and more efforts are being made to make the private sector to understand that these fragmented habitats can be connected, and that these will actually help us in conserving biodiversity. Then, of course, we have the climate resilient species integration, where we have recommended species. There are certain species that are climate resilient species, so we need to educate people on these, and some concerted efforts have to be made to look at some of their root architecture, their drought tolerance and non-invasiveness, and these are studies that are going on in various universities as well as ecological systems. Then I can't really tell you how important this is. The landscape zoning becomes so important to Sri Lanka. This is something that really should be our top priority, where the high slopes are kept for forests and native restoration, not for illegal constructions. We heard of so many illegal constructions which are really affected by the Ditwa, and so many instances where these came crashing down. So the high slopes have to be, and I think there are laws in Sri Lanka that do not allow construction in high slopes, but of course, as you know, there are so many places where such rules don't exist, and we all know that forest and native restoration is where the high slopes should be. Then we have the mid-slopes, agroforestry and contour planting, which should take place. The lower slopes, the perennial belts, and of course, this is an ideal world, but this is really how the landscape zoning should take place in islands such as Sri Lanka. And of course, in the valleys, you have the agriculture and the riparian buffers. Now, immediate actions that I can, recommend to the audience here is that we map the biodiversity hotspots and fragile slopes. I mean, I think some of it has already been done in certain mapping exercises that have been done by the Land Use Policy Planning Division. We have to introduce enriched canopy models and not just any old thing that, we feel like planting. We have to restore all the riparian corridors and look at bioengineering for high-risk zones. Training is of absolute necessity. Where field teams are trained in early warning signs and ecological land management. So these should take top priority in the work that goes on, especially in agricultural systems and in the plantation sector. Now, policies are, of course, of great importance. There are a whole lot, and Sri Lanka is very famous for doing lots of policies, and the policies just remain on tables. But we have to look at formulating good sectoral climate risk assessments, early warning systems. Now, we know that climate is not really taken in scenario planning. In most of biodiversity and climate are both not taken into consideration in scenario planning. We need to put these things into the right place, and also early warning systems, climate modeling, scenario planning. These are things that should come now as an important necessity. We also need to climate proof transportation. We need policies and for financial and economic instruments, ecosystem-based adaptation. All these things are very important policy perspectives that should be put. And I know that there is some measures being taken by the Finance Ministry actually in setting up a fund which is called the Canopy Fund, which will be looking at reforestation in the higher slopes. So there is action being taken in some way, but I think we need to push these things a little more and work a little bit more conscientiously on some of these key policy perspectives that need to be taken into consideration. Now, in conclusion, I'd like to say that Ditwa had a profound and multidimensional impact on Sri Lanka's economy. Heavy 5-day precipitation was witnessed, and it was extremely intense. And we are going to have more and more incidences of this nature. And we need to look at recovery and rehabilitation interventions, look at more and more work on the ground without talking. Talking a lot is really not going to be useful. And I think we need timely recovery and not just emergency response, so that we become ready, because Sri Lanka is going to really have much more of these sorts of incidences, and we really don't want people to just be nice and humanitarian and keep supporting the people. But of course, looking at how we can support them now. We are doing a climate action adaptation strategy for a population that is in the northwestern province in Chilau, which is adjacent to a mangrove ecosystem that was felled because of shrimp farming. And, these people are really vulnerable, and we are working with them on looking at short-term, medium-term, long-term measures in how they can, respond to emergencies of this nature. So I think Sri Lanka should work in small patches, look at communities that get severely affected by these, tell them how they can recover from these. There are some short-term measures, there are medium-term measures, and much longer-term measures that need to be taken. So if you can sort of work with specialized communities and tell them the importance. I mean, we couldn't find the correlation between whether the people understood that the mangrove cover that they had was really something that, helped them in combating any climate exigencies. So sometimes they don't really understand that even. So we need to bring that knowledge into their systems. So concerted knowledge and capacity building, these things are very important, especially in the very vulnerable communities on the coastal belt, in the steep slopes that we have, on how they can recover when such incidences take place. And actually we find that the poorest are hardest hit, and in this population that we are working with in the northwestern province, the poorest population had the houses which were most vulnerable to the floods, and it was not possible for them to combat the effects of these. So if they can be relocated to areas that are safer, there's some land use planning, etc., that is has to be looked at in these areas. So climate adaptation plans made for the provinces have to be put into operation, and funds have to be secured so that these can be taken care of. So in conclusion, and since we want to leave a little time for questions, we are climate proofing our heartlands require concerted action, nature-based solutions, scientifically grounded methods, which is really what we are looking at, and integrating biodiversity with slope stability is one of the sustainable pathways forward, is the message that we would like to give the audience here. So thank you very much, and I hope there will be some questions that we could, take. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Shiranee. Thank you very much for this very informative and very precise, clear presentation. And it's very encouraging to know that there is some initiatives taken by the private sector in mitigating the effects of natural disasters such as this, or as Professor Kotagama said, natural hazards, right? Creating corridors for animal migration, and then restoring wetland, and so on and so forth. And we really appreciate your role in linking private sector with academia and the researchers, channeling their support for research and biodiversity conservation. And I personally know that your effort has resulted in even creating new degree programs at the Colombo University Department of Zoology called Business and Biodiversity. So with that, I will take some of the questions that the audience has posted. One from Professor Kotagama. It's a very short question. So I have a small question. Do the droughts and floods have a negative influence on the ecosystem? So I would like to add a little bit to that question also. We know it resulted in huge change in our landscape in Sri Lanka, especially as Shiranee mentioned, in the Knuckles region and Horton Plains. And these are the areas we have our richest biodiversity. And I fear that most of our native species are already gone, at least to some extent. So do you think that this should create a new ecological niches for some potentially damaging species, such as alien species? And you mentioned that the biodiversity is the lifeline of our nation. So in time to come, what kind of risk we could anticipate? What kind of change that would really happen? Of course, it will be an academic answer. What kind of change will happen in our ecosystems in Sri Lanka?
Right, thank you. See, it's very fundamental from what Shiranee was trying to show, that we need to understand the systems to enable it to change the way we want it to take it to a point. But under normal circumstances, if we do not push the systems towards a point that we think is the best, maybe right or wrong, but that is how science is always going to tell us, because the studies will tell us whether this is what we want at the end of the day. But when you have a hazardous situation, what happens is the impact of the damage can be so much so that you would not be able to steer the directions on which the end product which you are thinking you would need to be realized, because the natural processes based on the destructive end could be faster than our efforts to try and get what we want at the end of the day. So most often what happens, it's very simple, because when you have cleared a landscape, the first thing that comes in there are weeds. Now, we may not want the weeds, but the weeds are the natural process of invasiveness, or what you call taking over the land which is empty. Now, then we have a issue of making sure that the invasives don't establish themselves, and we try to fight against it. So these are all technical issues that has to be recognized, because when you have a massive landscape change, what would happen immediately is that since we are incapable of rectifying the solutions that is needed for that large landscape change, nature will take the path, and in the most what you call the least resistant path is what nature will always take. And the most least resistant path in a recolonization is from pioneers that are mostly invasive, because they have the ability to colonize much faster than the traditional plants or the native plants, and that makes it a huge difference. Now, at one place, I think Shiranee mentioned about the kakila. Now, that's a classic example, right? When you open up the landscapes in the wet zone, kakila just comes in much faster than the normal things. But if you are in the heart of Singaraja and you open up a patch, you see kakila doesn't come so fast. It takes some time, because the natural vegetation is buffering it from the kakila seeds or kakila cuts or whatever it is. But in a massive land change, as we see in Ditwa, invasives coming into the picture is very much the result. It will happen.
Right, yeah.
It's how you will try to fight against that, rather than, I would say, to take a strategy which is slightly different. It's not to fight against what nature is trying to do. So if you're taking nature-based solutions as a means to go forward, what you have to do is get that invasive to help you to achieve your objectives at the end of the day. It is like there's a famous saying for this: "Yakagen වැඩ ගන්නවා වගේ." If you know how to get work from the devil is going to be there, but you have to know how to get work out of the devil. So nature processes, invasives that we have already brought into this country in many large numbers would probably take over much faster than the traditional natural plants, which take some time. You know, they are not that, the character itself doesn't exist in them. Invasives have the character of sort of pole-mill going and doing whatever that they want. So you have to fight not against it, but I would say fight with it. And that is a science which you have to evolve. You know, it doesn't come out at once. It is a science that you will have to evolve. Yeah, the invasive will come, but how would you ensure that the invasive will not go beyond a certain point, before which, because most invasives are annuals. So you have a year to try and ensure that you harness the invasives beyond and ensure that your natural things come behind it. But to do that, we must have the understanding of the invasives, their rate of what you call regeneration. We have to have the understanding of our native plants and their rate of regeneration, so that you can match it. You know, when you run a race, you have to know your person beside you, when to go fast and when not to go fast. Otherwise, you just tire yourself and you don't achieve your objective. So these are very interesting ways of looking at it, but not that it has not been done. It has been done in some places in the world. But for that, the fundamental basic knowledge of A, the invasives, B, our natural vegetation, like the natural grasses, natural vegetations like things that have been here, not that what have been brought from outside, how fast are they growing, and so on and so forth. That knowledge must be there to help facilitate them to take the advantage over the invasive. So that is the strategy I can see. A biological strategy would be that. Otherwise, you will be somewhat wasting a lot of time. But that requires early work, some research, identifying the rates of growth, all of these things, which I doubt we do have.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I hope I answered.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And then we have another couple of questions. I may perhaps ask from Shiranee.
Professor,
Yeah.
can you switch on your video?
Yeah, sure, of
Wipula
course.
is not seen.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry for the disturbance.
No, it's all right. Thank you very much. Yeah. So there's one question from Mr. Karuna Lagge. He said that, of course, on one hand, humans are causing damage, but on other hand, humans are also trying to restore nature, creating deserts into rainforest. And as you said, private sector is doing a lot of efforts in mitigating the effects of natural hazards. So is it really fair to blame humans for all these actions? Because we need the industrialization and we are depending on the natural resources. So it is fair to blame the public or the people for these events.
I mean, I don't think there is anybody to blame. But the sector that we work with, being the private sector, have understood that their very existence depends on biodiversity. And I think that realization is coming with all these hard hit problems that the country is facing. Now, the plantation sector has realized that slope stabilization, water retention, all these issues are of paramount importance if they want to survive. So even the tourism sector, the same thing. So I think it is now the loop is closing, and the sector is realizing that without doing what they have to do and get back to the roots, it is not going to help them to go on. So I think we are in a good place. And I would like, both Professor Yapa and Professor Kotagama, being scientists, lead your people to give us the science behind this, because we are trying to manage some invasives in mangrove restoration that we are doing. And there is no documented information on invasive species management anywhere. So it's sad. And there are so many PhDs and, so many people putting out dissertations and stuff like that. And nobody really helps us to get the science, right. So getting the science right is really important. As I mentioned at the end, if we are going to do nature-based solutions, we need to get the science right. I mean, we cannot do it otherwise. So with all these students that you work with, I think we hope the next generation will bring out the children that we need, which has a sound thinking about what this country needs. So I think everybody has a part to play, and we can't blame anybody. This is a poor country. It's a developing country where everybody needs to survive. So it is important that we have the right science.
Can I just come in? That was a very interesting question. I
Thank you
don't
very
know
much,
whether the person who questioned knows what is happening in China, what is happening in Middle East, vegetating the desert, vegetating the landscapes, and the consequences. See, these are good. There are two things. One, that question was nice because it opens up the Pandora for real discussion. Actually, if we are not to blame for what we have done, there is a problem. That means the persons have not yet recognized that the world is falling apart. We are having climate change. We are losing biodiversity. We are losing the ecological balances. We are losing whatever we want to talk of naturalness is not because of nature. Because nature will anyway have changed it, but it would not have happened at this speed. Nature will change, no question. Species are not here for permanent. They are not here forever. They will change. They will differ. But not at the rate at which it is happening, which is what the problem is. And the one that is enabling the rate to increase is not any other
Other
but
humans,
the
yeah,
human species.
yeah,
So
definitely,
you
yes,
have
sir.
to take the responsibility for
Yeah.
accelerating the process positively and also negatively.
Yeah.
You see, the positive conversion of the deserts to greenery in China and in the Middle East sounds very nice, but now they are realizing that that is affecting the global, the what you call, not the global, but the environmental process in there, and it is causing problems with the dryness, and it's causing with heavy rain and humidity factors and all of this. So we have to learn to be understanding, like what just Shiranee said. The science is all that we have, right? We are the only species which is capable of trying to understand where we are and how we have to make a difference between destruction and construction. So if we don't find the means to achieve, then we have to take the responsibility of having done what we have done so far. Rectification becomes necessary because if anybody says that the planet is not is in the good way, I will ask him to go back and look at the ecosystems assessment, Millennium Ecosystems Assessment done in 2000, coming out in 2003 and finally in 2005, initiated by Kofi Annan. Don't visit a doctor if you are not sick.
Yeah.
Why do you visit a doctor?
Yeah.
The same answer.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, and thank you very much, Shiranee, for that that answer, and also directing us where we have to go in our future research. On the same line, I think we have time for only one more question, and I'll also ask that question from Shiranee. So you have been working as a CR of the IUCN, and so given the fact that natural hazard, I don't want to use the disasters after listening to Professor Kotagama's talk, natural hazards, it's a recurring event. So in Sri Lanka, is there an effort to assess the damage on biodiversity lost after hazard like Ditwa? Because we had similar situations earlier also, not in that extent. So perhaps in prioritizing research and so on and so forth.
I'm sorry to say that there is no concerted action taken to assess the damage that has been a result of Cyclone Ditwa. Now, small sectors are doing it. The plantation sector has rallied round and they are doing it because obviously it affects their very survival. I mean, that is the only reason I would say that, such action is being taken, because it affects the communities that live within the estates. It affects their product, so I think it's just not really a state-sponsored, a study or anything like that, but it is because the private sector wants to do it and they are interested. So it's sad that we are not doing it, and it is important that we take these things into our national biodiversity strategy and action plan because the cyclones and natural disasters of this sort will continue to happen. They'll be more intense. And since they are natural, we will not be able to get away from them. It's just to look at how we cope. And also with the UNFCCC, we are lucky because there are so many funds that are available. Loss and damage, vulnerable countries can, access a lot of these funding, especially for the communities that are affected by these floods. So, there's a big rethinking that is required and refocusing and not doing business as usual because this is the biggest priority that we have now, because climate vulnerability is one of the biggest issues. So I think the thinking will change, but by the time it will be too late.
Okay, thank you very much, Shiranee. And sir, thank you very much. I think now it's 9:30 and we have to close this session. So, although there are some several questions, so we want to wind up the session right now. And may I invite Samantha to make up the closing remarks?
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So as we draw today's session to a close, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation and heartfelt thanks to our distinguished speakers, Professor Sarath Kotagama, University of Colombo, and Mrs. Shiranee Yasarathne, Biodiversity Sri Lanka, immediate past president of IEPSL, for sharing their invaluable insights. We extend our sincere appreciation to our moderator, Professor Wipula Yapa, for guiding the discussion and fostering engaging interactions. We also are grateful to the Institute of Environmental Professionals Sri Lanka, IEPSL, our strategic partner, for its leadership and continued support in strengthening this national initiative. Our thanks further extend to the National Science Foundation Sri Lanka for disseminating the webinar through the STMIS platform, and to the Association of Commonwealth Universities for sharing the event across its global network. A special note of thanks to all of the participants for your active presence and thoughtful questions, which have truly contributed to the vibrancy and success of this session. We would also like to inform participants that e-certificates will be issued for this webinar. Certificates will be provided only to participants who registered via the official Google form and submit the feedback form following the session. Further details regarding certificate issuance will be shared via email. Before we conclude, we are also delighted to invite you to the webinar number 5 of the series titled Risks on Flood Production and Sustainable Agriculture. It will be held on 19 February 2026 from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. via Zoom. This session will be featuring Dr. Sangeet Ratnayaka, Senior Lecturer, Sri Lanka Technology Campus, and Professor Yong Song Lai, Professor Sichuan Agriculture University, China, and will be moderated by Dr. Renuka Aryavansa, Senior Lecturer at Sri Lanka Technology Campus. With that, we officially conclude the webinar. Thank you very much once again for joining us this evening, and we look forward to welcoming you to our upcoming sessions. Good night.